Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Needless to say, all of us feel a great sense of relief at the fact that the long awaited ceasefire has, for the most part, been announced. Beyond that, things seem very hazy, things seem very unclear, and I think all of us feel a sense of doubt about the state of affairs. Clearly, we wouldn't call this a victory, but at the same time, we respect the Palestinians' decision to agree to this deal. To make some sense of the current state of affairs and help us ask and answer the questions, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we have my good friend and colleague, dear brother from PIN, the Palestine Information Network, no stranger to, I would love to say this channel, but this is no longer, that channel no longer exists, which is a story for another video. But yes, Isnad Academy has been taken down as a result of the obvious, but we won't get into the details right now. Perhaps later on, perhaps not. I have recorded a separate message for that. But with us is Mawlana Ebrahim Moosa. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I pray that you are well, Mawlana. Thank you for being with us again.
All good, Jazakallah khairan, barakallah fiqh. Shukran for this opportunity on what is definitely a milestone. 2 years on, we've been through so many different discussions over these 2 years. This is actually the period over which we've got to know each other much more better. Allah, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. So this is a milestone in the Ummah and a milestone in the story of Gaza and a milestone in our relationship as well.
Alhamdulillah. Mawlana, your first thoughts after everything that we've witnessed. Things happen so rapidly. We barely had a chance to speak about the beautiful document that you compiled, essentially summarizing where we stand now after 2 years of this genocide. And this document was compiled shortly before the announcement of this 20-point plan. Then a whole lot happened since then. So just before we get into the what do we call them, the details, what are your initial thoughts about what has been transpiring and what is currently happening?
I have to start off by saying that when it comes to the Palestinian people, when it comes to the genocide in Gaza, we respect any kind of decision that has come from the people of Gaza, because we essentially have been outsiders to everything that has been occurring in the Gaza Strip. Not with our hearts, not with our sentiments, and perhaps not with our actions as well, but we need to realize that they've lived through a genocide, they've resisted this genocide, they understand the balance of powers, they understand the balance of factors, and therefore whatever decision they make, we fully accept their decision and understand that decision to be the correct decision. Not only the decision that is taken by people on the ground who wanted to see this horror end immediately, but even the negotiators from the resistance who had to make these difficult decisions under a lot of pressure understand that so many of them have relatives in the Gaza Strip. We just saw Dr. Basim Naeem's son passing away. We saw what happened to Dr. Khalil Al-Hayya's son in the last attack in Doha. So they themselves are targets and their families are targets. So they're very much aware of the decisions and do not make these decisions in a kind of comfort zone. So the first thing is, this is a moment for us to embrace the moment on behalf of the people of Gaza, that after 2 years, even though we acknowledge the nature of the struggle or the nature of the genocide might have just shifted from one to another, we appreciate that it's a great ni'mah from Allah that we're not seeing, at least for the past few days, bodies burning, at least for the past few days, limbs being amputated, and the like. This also, is a moment to be able to pay tribute to the people of Gaza. If you were to look at those scenes, just reflect on how many times we saw those scenes repeated over the past 2 years. People displaced, there's a temporary pause, there's a lull, there's a ceasefire, and en masse people return to their homes or return to what is remaining of their homes. And we saw those scenes repeated again over the weekend. So that shows very clearly who is the true owner of the land. And we pay tribute to that kind of steadfastness. One of the American activists who was aboard the flotilla said very eloquently that, I have to attribute my awakening to what the journalists of Gaza have done, that you showed us what our governments are capable of. You showed us what is fakeness in the world, and you freed us from so many of the illusions that we came to believe over the years. You awoke the entire world. So those people, those journalists, the women, the children in Gaza, with all the difficulties, you awoke the world. But the last thought I would have on this particular moment is, let's not just frame it as victory. Many people would go the full throated response and say this is victory. I think let's rephrase it to say rather, this is a moment where the Palestinians were not broken. But if we were to characterize this as victory and defeat, yes, from a moral sense, from a spiritual sense, we can easily justify that. But when it comes to the difficulties and the real agony and bleak future that the people in Gaza face, sometimes it's insensitive to say this is a victory and this is a defeat. Rather, let us focus on their steadfastness, yes, but focus on the fact that they are not broken. But with them not being broken, there is still great pain and great destruction on the streets of Gaza. And why I say this is so important at this moment is, if we speak in absolute terms of victory and defeat, we take the focus away from the fact that this is a genocide, and thereafter it diminishes the responsibility that I owe and all of us owe to the Palestinian people to fully complete the business of accountability for this genocide. If we speak in absolute terms of a victory, a war may end, but a genocide just doesn't end with a mere declaration. And that's what we need to understand at this particular moment.
Mawlānā, there's a very beautiful approach that you've taken, and it's something that I hope that I've managed to implement as well, and that is to respect the what's the word, the auto Muhammad, but the ability of the Palestinians to speak for themselves. There's a word that slips me. And it's important to respect their position, regardless of how we may feel about it or our suspicions about it. And I found that many people, and to an extent, expectedly so, were highly suspicious of a sudden ceasefire unilaterally declared by Trump, when for 2 years we witnessed massacre upon massacre. We use the word genocide so frequently these days that it's almost losing its sting. So we need to vary the words. We've witnessed things that we've never even seen from Hollywood. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And yes, it brings about such tremendous relief that this horror has to an extent ceased. However, what is the reason for this sudden shift? From my perspective, Mawlānā, I see a power crazy Donald Trump wanting to, play the savior of the world. Innama nahnu muslihun. We are only the peacemakers. We are only the reformers. And putting on this huge facade of peace, apparently aiming for the Nobel Peace Prize. The whole world, the global south, everyone except the UK, the US, and Israel are essentially now saying this is a genocide. We want to recognize Palestine. People are pushing for a two-state solution. People are marching and protesting like never before. The pro-Palestine or the Palestine struggle has been really brought to center stage. From my perspective, I can't help but believe that the international pressure really just became way too much for these tyrants to ignore, and they had to cave in some way, shape, or form. Because they are, for all intents and purposes, imploding, as you've so beautifully outlined in that document of yours. From your perspective, Mawlānā, what were the pieces, the domino pieces that set into motion this ceasefire that seemingly came out of nowhere, that we've shouted for and protested for, and we've done everything in our reach that we could, that we tried to do, may Allah accept, and just with a piece of paper and an announcement, and we reaching, khalas, everything is done, big show in Sharm el-Sheikh. Please make sense of all of this for us from your perspective. Barakallahu feekum.
Yeah, if we were to talk about that big show in Sharm el-Sheikh, well, it's really qualifies as a circus. And look at the declaration that had come out of that peace summit, peace in the Middle East, solving a 3,000-year-old problem, and this will erase all the tensions in the Middle East for a foreseeable future for posterity almost. That's what was alleged by Donald Trump. Uh, I don't want to belabor that particular point, but even if a person came there seeking to win favor with Donald Trump, he didn't do anything well to be able to cast himself in any better light. Sisi steps up to try and shake the hand of Trump. He refuses his hand. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer comes to the podium, hoping that he's going to be able to say a few words. Trump just sends him to the back. You have the Mahmoud Abbas being slotted in there at the last minute. So it's just one failure on top of the other failure. But I think within all of that, we see Trump speaking some truths. Not necessarily. I think at the peace summit that was just a photo op and a marketing opportunity. But what he said at the Knesset, for example, and he repeated this prior to this, that Israel cannot fight the whole world. Israel cannot fight the whole world. And he said this to Netanyahu prior to the ceasefire, and he said it at the Knesset again. So one can strip away all the theatrics and realize that was a key point. And therefore, this ceasefire and the Trump plan before that, and even prior to that, the plan put forward by France and Saudi Arabia at the United Nations to talk about a Palestinian state, and that was endorsed by so many states on the sidelines of the United Nations. We could put it all into the category of trying to save Israel from itself, because there's too much to lose here for the Western world in terms of its reputational damage, in terms of its shared values, in terms of its financial interests that were also put forward by Francesca Albanese when she struck a raw nerve. Everybody looks at the consumer targets, the small boys, whether it's Coca-Cola or McDonald's, but she heightened or highlighted all the big players from the West who benefit, including asset management firms and all the like, that benefit from the Israeli occupation. So I would put it down to saving Israel from itself, finding a happy note or a happy turn off to be able to keep everybody happy and seemingly just bury all the bad news of the genocide. At least that's what they think. But behind the scenes, it would also be the persistence of the people of Gaza and the resistance. And that's why I said in the very first response, pay tribute to the people of Gaza. That the plan was let's depopulate Gaza, which is the essence of a genocide, push them over into Egypt. And the people of Gaza, with those recurrent returns, the exodus back into Gaza city and back into the north, they foil those plans. And the resistance then also playing that role of never being able to be defeated, and still after the war maintaining their control or control and command. In that kind of situation, you have no choice whatsoever, even under pressure from Zionist funders, end this in a kind of way that keeps everybody happy, but preserves obviously the right in inverted commas for the Israelis to come back. Not necessarily again finish the job in the way it has been done so brutally over the past 2 years, but buy more time, or limit yourself in terms of how you are going to seek to finish the job in the phase that lies ahead.
Naam, subhanallah, it's the scenes of the hostage exchange. These once again left us with a whole mixed bag of emotions. It's always an eye opener when one sees the reality of so many Palestinians being in those jails, and one sees, clearly young boys who are clearly, not adults or shouldn't be trialed as adults, and you see people coming. All of them look like they lost so much weight in prison. People are coming back, dead bodies with signs of torture. And the opposite can be said about the Israeli hostages that were held in Gaza for 2 years. Once again, we find reports that leave us speechless as to how they were treated, and what their perspective is like of their captors, so to speak. Mawlānā, what has this scene done for the Ummah, and where is the Ummah in the struggle right now? It's a very emotional time. We're all tired. Just a few nights ago, I recall asking you if it's okay if we can take a very long holiday once we've reached liberation. We're not quite there, but certainly, after 2 years of this, where does the Ummah stand? Seeing these prisoners come, it feels almost as though this is closing a chapter. But you and I both know that certainly that's a worrisome notion, while it is welcoming. Because if we for even a second believe that we can call this a closed chapter, then unfortunately we've made a huge mistake. Your perspective on the scenes, Mawlānā?
So to focus on those particular scenes, one key talking point that I've sought to emphasize from this exchange and from the ceasefire is, let us not cheapen Palestinian blood. Let us not cheapen Muslim blood. And the entire way this ceasefire was structured is obviously to prioritize Israeli blood and Israeli humanity over Palestinian humanity. And we see, the focus on those 28, 48 in total, the 20 alive and the 28 that were buried beneath the rubble or were deceased in Gaza, the Israeli prisoners. Whereas we have 10,000 Palestinians who are buried beneath that same rubble. And ironically, I saw one of the reports saying that one of the Muslim states, as part of their ceasefire commitments, are sending in bulldozers and earth-moving equipment to be able to take out the Israeli bodies so that the sea proceeds smoothly. What kind of priorities is that, and what kind of prioritization of Israeli lives? So, we simultaneously know the hundreds of Palestinians who are kept in the cemeteries of the dead. Khadr Adnan, the Palestinian Mujahid, comes to mind, who passed away after hunger strike in Israeli prisons before Tufan al-Aqsa. no talk about his body whatsoever. And what was also quite striking is all of these prisoners that were released from the Palestinian side, when they returned, they were in a total time warp, not knowing what happened to their families. And you have the story of Saleh al-Ja'farawi eagerly awaiting the return of his brother, and that rendezvous, that meeting, does not happen, as it was expected. On the other hand, you have a lot of prisoners who thought that their families were totally wiped out, that they were deceased, that there were no more, and the Israelis had fed them all kinds of tales as psychological warfare, and they were pleasantly surprised to actually see their children, see their wives alive, or find out that they may still be alive, but maybe not in Gaza, but in another place altogether. I saw one of the Palestinian prisoners who was part of the prisoner escape a few years ago, and that legendary story at the time, the Jilbawa prisoner escape, where they dug out of the prison with the spoons. That was a couple of years ago, right under the nose of the Israelis. But he was rearrested, put back in prison, and I think spent a total of 32 years behind bars. But the footage showed him meeting up with children and just severing that moment, shaking the hands of children, putting a bracelet around the hand of a little girl. And it reminds me of something that I read relating to Ahmad Kathrada, the freedom fighting stalwart in South African RTCs, who said that while we were in Robben Island, the thing that I desired the most was for a child to come and visit me at the prison, because in those years we never saw a child. We forgot what it is to shake the hand of the child. We forgot what it is to, rub one's hand over the head of a child, to get the smell of a child, to get the naughtiness of a child. And he said once, towards the end of his term, closer to the end of apartheid, one of his lawyers came in with his little girl, and he said it was as if I was transported to another planet, just seeing that girl giggle, just touching that girl. So I thought of that very clearly when I saw, I think, Mahmoud, this Palestinian prisoner who and freedom fighter was released. So I think just coming out of those scenes, I think a question, it's perhaps a rhetorical question, but we need to ask ourselves, how have we allowed Palestinian life to be so cheapened? How have we allowed Muslim life to be cheapened so much? And you mentioned quite correctly so earlier that even a word as weighty as genocide, we've allowed it to be normalized and we've allowed it to be cheapened, and that should not be a mere adjective, but it should be a call to action. So, from all of this, where does the Ummah stand? We must realize that uh, something of the scale that occurred over the past 2 years has set ablaze fires that will not cease until their causes are removed. Until their causes are removed, those fires will not burn down. So don't look at that inferno in Gaza for sure that has maybe uh, taken some of the flames out of that, but look at what is feeding these flames, and as long as what is feeding these flames, in terms of our own weakness, in terms of the vengeance of the enemy and the evil of the enemy, as long as those factors remain in place, then this ummah still has a lot of work on its hands.
No, absolutely. Mawlana, one thing that puzzles me is um, even after 2 years of genocide, even after the narrative has essentially, for the most part, shifted in a way that I don't think either of us could have imagined it would shift. And look, I'm sorry about this, but my standard example to demonstrate to people how much the narrative has shifted is the Superman movie. And the reason why that's my standard example is that, look, look, as Muslims, it's not our world, it shouldn't be, but it's mainstream. And if mainstream starts portraying those who we consider bad guys as the bad guys to the point where they have to come out and launch defenses and critique the movie, even though nobody explicitly stated that it was about that struggle. It was just so abundantly clear to everyone. I think that that's a sign of a huge shift. However, the key narrative still is maintained, and that is that there was peace. And Hamas, they initiated an attack on the 7th of October and killed innocent people, 1,200 approximately innocent people. And they started this war. They kidnapped innocent people from Israel, unprovoked attack. And therefore, Israel had the right to defend itself. That same narrative is still the one that's upheld. It's the same narrative that caused the Isnad Academy YouTube channel to be removed, because their resistance is not seen as a right to resist. It's not seen as their international, their right under international law, or their right under God's law, or any law that they can resist against their occupier. No, it's still seen as it was with Nelson Mandela, as it was with the ANC and Mkhonto we Sizwe here in South Africa, even post 1994, well into the 2000s, where their identity as registered terrorists was maintained. Mawlānā, in 2025, for a truth to be so glaringly obvious, yet still seen as a lie, a conspiracy, a false narrative, as the untruth, to the point where only we as South Africans have the, practically only us as South Africans have the liberty to speak about these things publicly and say them publicly because of our past and because they are not outlawed in our country. But the problem is we are, of course, navigating other legal divides when we go onto international platforms and the like. Your perspective on this narrative, Mawlānā, what does the Ummah need to do to prove to the Western world, at least, that Palestine has the right to resist? The whole 2 years was about Israel has the right to defend itself. How do we change that narrative to make people understand and remember that, well, Palestinians as the occupied people have the right to resist? I think we as South Africans have a unique stance in this regard. What's your take on this one, huh?
It's not necessarily the case for us to be so disillusioned. I mean, I genuinely feel what you're saying, and realize that one still has to qualify in many fora the fact that Palestinians have a right to resist. So you need to first issue a whole lot of caveats over October the 7th and Hamas before one dives into the rights of the Palestinians. Let's look at it from a few ways. The first is we notice all over the world that there is a definite shift even in perceptions relating to Hamas. So if we were to look at polls that come from Jewish youth in the United States of America themselves, many of them, and this has set out alarm bells amongst the Hasperists and amongst the Zionist lobbies, that people of our own Jewish youth are relating more closer to Hamas. So it's not necessarily a case of people not, associating with the Palestinian struggle, but shunning Hamas to aside. Many people have seen them as heroes. Many of them have, genuinely looked out and resonate with the icons of the resistance and look out for the latest news, which they cherish and which they celebrate. But there is a tendency to be able to look at Palestinians as perfect victims. So we are in solidarity with your corpses, but we are not in solidarity with your rockets, so to speak, or we are not in solidarity with your armed resistance, which is something that needs to be challenged quite strongly if we saying Palestinians have agency. If we saying Palestinians should be centered in the story, then let's appreciate what the Palestinian center. Each and every Palestinian may have questions sometimes on this tactic or this tactic of the resistance. They genuinely have those debates in their society, but none of them question the very concept of resistance and the concept of armed resistance. So victimhood should not be a requirement, or victimhood should not be a, a, a proviso for a person to show solidarity with the Palestinian cause. That's another factor. We also then have to educate more broadly that freedom struggles are messy. And we are a victim of a narrative here in our own country, in South Africa, of a very romanticized version of our transition that had occurred. And, I probably have a book here in front of me that was written by Yunus Karim, who is a former minister, a member of the South African Communist Party and the like, uh, who details Mkhonto Wesizwe armed operations, special operations during the period of apartheid. And it was a revelation to me, and going through a school history curriculum and reading a bit more, nobody knows these stories. So that's another area. I really think that even before we educate about Palestine, there's a need to educate about various other struggles around the world, how messy those transitions were, and how difficult those transitions were, and how very tricky decisions resistance movements had to make to be able to embark on resistance tactics, and they had to satisfy their consciences as well when making those decisions. But maybe a last question is, people would sometimes glorify Yasser Arafat for obviously genuinely some great actions that he took, or the PFLP, Leila Khalid and the like. So there's also a broader issue where people immediately start squirming, even within the solidarity movements, whenever there's a mention of Islam. And that's then a responsibility upon us and upon them, upon us to be able to say that, yes, there have been, total aberrations of what Islam stands for in the name of jihad and armed struggle. But this is the same Islam that ruled Palestine harmoniously for so many centuries. This is Palestine where the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are held by Muslims for centuries. This is Omar al-Farouk, who signs Al-Ahd al-Umariyah, that guarantees the freedom of safety of Christians, and even allows Jews to come back who were exiled previously. And Salahuddin al-Ayyubi later upholds this for centuries. So we need to educate people that Islam is not Zionism. Yes, Zionists have weaponized religion and have made it something exclusivist, and have used that to create massive mayhem and destruction and genocide and bloodshed in this land of Palestine. But Islam and its ethics of war would not allow the same. So I think it's a mixture of all of those factors in trying to deconstruct this. And one last thing, which I think is very critical, if we say generally people around the world support the Palestinians solidarity wise and have some kind of inclination towards armed resistance, though many may not be as bold to express it, but they do have an inclination towards it. If this represents the groundswell of the world, why is it that your social media platforms and your streaming platforms, won't allow you to say this. It then shows the gap between uh, our power and theirs. And this should then be the moment to be able to say, let's prioritize the building of power. And building of power is not, it's not a bad word. Power is something that buys influence. And it can be soft power, it can be hard power, it can be technological power, it can be economic power, it can be military power. It means that we still have not reached that point where we have enough power, and those who have power, even though the narrative is not their favor, that balance of power is still assisting them to be able to suppress our voices.
100%. Um, I mean, I gave my khutbah, I think it was last week or the week before, was based on the fact on this point of what do we do now? How do we direct ourselves now? I said, look, most people, when they ask that question, they seek direct, approaches. How do I have a direct effect on what I see going on there now? I want to have cause and effect. But if you look at the directive of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who clearly indicated that the reason we find ourselves in the state that we find ourselves, as you've just described, on the back foot in a weak state, is as a result of weakness. And he pinpointed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it is our being enamored by materialism and our distance from the reality of the year after. I would put it that way, because that's what it comes down to. He says, Hubbud dunya wa karahiyatul maut. It's being enamored, drowning in materialism, and not being attached to the reality of the akhirah. When you just say fear of death, people I'm not scared of death. It's not as simple as that. It's like the reality of death. You don't live life with the reality that this life is but a temporary transition towards a permanent afterlife. And when you don't have this, you suffer from wahan. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he called this wahan as a special kind of weakness. You're not just weak, you're especially weak. You've got like a special kind of weakness. And his description of it ﷺ was that Allah will take the fear of you out of your enemies' hearts. They won't be scared of you. And you will cast their fear into your hearts. And one thing that I want to make sure people know is that don't stop speaking about the Palestine struggle or anything related to it as a result of, my channel got taken down or the Isnad Academy channel got taken down. That's what they want. They want you to be intimidated. I kept racking my mind around, why my channel? It's a small channel. We barely had 7,000 subscribers. We're only around for about 5 years. It's a grassroots, community-based, on-the-ground channel, talking to people on the ground and communicating the real issues, but with an unfiltered message because of the privileges that we have as South African Muslims. But as I posted earlier on my WhatsApp, I'm reading this book, Unlocking Surah Fatiha. Is it Unlocking Surah Fatiha? It's a new publication by Yaqeen Institute, and I highly recommend that people read it. It's an analysis of Surah Al-Fatiha and how it resolves some of the major issues that we face today as an ummah. And it uses Gaza and the genocide that we've witnessed as sort of like a case study throughout the work. It's only about 250 pages or so. It will be available on the audiobook chapters platform fairly soon, inshallah. But for now, get it from Yaqeen, read it. It's an excellent work because of what it provides for you. But yeah, my point is that this is a watershed moment, and we need to combat that weakness. That's the indirect approach that you don't want to hear about. And my advice to myself and the Ummah is, we need to be producing our own version of Zahran Mamdani's and our own version of Albanese, Jessica Albanese, and our own version of not our own version, another version of Dr. Naledi Pandor, and another version of Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. Where are the the ward councillors of tomorrow among our youth? Where are the future presidents that we've identified in the Muslim community as, these young kids? They should be raised with an eye of politics, and we need to train them with the seerah from a very young age. Where's that vision that doesn't just think about my family, my children, and the next 25 years and then my retirement, but beyond that, to my community, my ummah? As the Prophet Muhammad SAW said, this is our time, from my perspective at least, this is our time to say, weakness got us there. Let's fight the weakness by strengthening ourselves and becoming a resourceful community and a resourceful ummah. The fact that they can just, step in and take 5 years of content that we produced as Isnad Academy and just say, you know what, we don't agree with what you say, and we'll find a reason to silence you. The fact that they have that type of power, and that the next day, what do? We have to just, create another channel. Why? Because we've been playing PlayStation 5 and watching Netflix and chill and, going out on weekends and I hope, inshallah, that Gaza has woken some of us up to the reality that we've got a lot of work to do, and now's the time not to sit back, relax, and think, oh, alhamdulillah, we've made it. Now's the time to actually get to the real work that has the long-term effect, because it's a long-term game. So that's kind of answering my question on what should we be doing now. And I would like to pose the same question to you, Mawlānā. What should we be doing now as the ummah at this current stage? Of course, it's not the time to just say, okay, give up the struggle, but where would you say we pour in our energies and our focus?
I hear you feeling or speaking extensively, Mawlana, and just to add to the discussion about, it was a dream, and you've shared this dream with us, and we appreciate the excellent content that came out of this, and the priority that you gave to, if you want to say it, your baby, basically. But I also look at Sean King, and he's been extremely vocal in this genocide, and Allah has blessed him with guidance also in amidst this genocide. And his kind of approach to this was, once this genocide began in the early days, start speaking a lot about it, and eventually, in those early days already, so much of his content, and so he said this was an organizing platform for me. You build up these networks, it gives you power, you can reach out to people that you never knew before. So it really becomes the center of your life, and then when it's torn away from you, you really feel shattered for that particular moment. But in that moment, he said, I lost everything, but I experienced that feeling to get closer to Islam. And the story is long and the story is beautiful, but he eventually embraces Islam, and he says that loss that I had endured with all of those followers opened up the space for something greater. Myself personally, even in the early days, Meta did some terrible things to our accounts, and what had occurred after that was, the anti-apartheid conference took place in Johannesburg. We met amazing people in person, and also, shifted to another social media platform altogether, which I actually found, although it's still ridden with bias, but I found the maturity of the discussions and the depth of the discussions actually assisted, perhaps in terms of growth. So those are just some thoughts, and when people move, when we see how easily it is for somebody to remove a channel, I cannot but help to say how, let's juxtapose that with how easily they make themselves into the victims and make the Palestinians into the perpetrators. How easily they have stolen an entire land. 78% of Palestine stolen in 1948 in the Nakba, and still you brush it off with a land without a people for a people without a land. So it's that same kind of inversion of reality that has occurred until now. But in terms of priorities, let me just say I put it down to triple A, and this is just at the top of my mind currently. But before I come to that triple A, let's remember that a period of lull can be a period when we become lax, and the enemy capitalizes on our lack of attention. And we saw exactly what the enemy did during this particular genocide. It allowed, for example, Iran and Hezbollah group to be able to think that we're entering into negotiations. We don't want a full-blown war. And when everybody thought, that's the direction things are going, lo and behold, massive blows are struck against their leadership, kept the Hamas leadership to be able to discuss a peace plan, thinking that a peace treaty is imminent. And in that moment of the guard being let down, that's when the enemy strikes. So we are not dealing with a different Israel after the latest ceasefire. The Israeli entity is the same. Their ideas of genocide are the same. Their ideas of a greater Israel are the same, and that should be sufficient to tell us that our level of energy should exactly be the same. As they say, the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. We've been busy trying to repair that roof and act while it was raining and it was pouring, so to speak, during the genocide. Um, we actually have greater room to do that, provided that we do it now. We should not fear the enemy's strength, but we should fear the believer's complacency after victory. So in terms of that, my triple A, Mawlānā, which is not exhaustive, but I would first say let us go all out. In addition to that very critical point of building strength, is let us go all out to ensure accountability. And we've seen in previous tragedies how every human being is sacred, and the victims of the Holocaust are, a painful aberration on human history. And those we feel for every person who was killed in tragedies like that, that it was weaponized, as Norman Finkelstein and the like have written in the Holocaust industry, to make it from a Holocaust with a small h into the Holocaust with a capital H, and capitalize on that suffering to be able to shun any criticism that would come for the state of Israel. But what was done is, until today, you would always find books on the Holocaust continuously being produced. You would find movies on the Holocaust continually being produced. And I'm saying, in terms of accountability, uh, one level of that is keeping the story alive. If we hosted guests from Gaza, survivors during the genocide, all the more continue bringing those guests after the genocide. Set up museums, set up online exhibits to be able to keep the story alive. Storytelling is going to be very important. And then the other part of accountability is accountability for the perpetrators of this genocide. So those IDF soldiers, Israeli IOF soldiers who are currently taking refuge, is coming in and out of South Africa, that cannot be accepted. We are pleased with what the South African government has said, that that case will continue. They're not buying into the narrative that peace just buries a genocide. We need to look at the fact that embassy is still open. We need to look at the fact that the coal sales still continue. All of that needs to fall under the ability of accountability, and I think accountability on the Arab states. If Turkey, if Qatar, if Egypt are saying that we are guarantors of the ceasefire, 23 Palestinians have been killed so far. Why is the pressure always on Hamas? We need to keep them also accountable. Anyway, number two, I think I'm a bit passionate for another A in terms of archiving. I think I've seen too much pain in terms of it cannot be that so much effort is put in and it just goes up in an instant. And this, so let's prioritize the creation of our own platforms and the preservation of our own content, and bring in the best minds to be able to do that. And even if Gaza sees itself on an improved trajectory, Allah willing, the last A is Masjid al-Aqsa. And Al-Aqsa, I always feel that, at our initiative, the Palestine Information Network, and creating platforms like First Qibla, it all started off with Masjid al-Aqsa, planting the love of Masjid al-Aqsa, looking at those violations of Masjid al-Aqsa, what is the temple movement, and all of that. And 2 times after the ceasefire was announced, Ben Gavir was in Masjid al-Aqsa. 2 days. He's visited every Jewish holiday now and then, since he took office, and within this genocide a number of times, but 2 times since this genocide has ended. The ceasefire, the ceasefire is coming to effect, and that shows that Al-Aqsa was the battlefield. Al-Aqsa was the impetus for Tufan Al-Aqsa, and Al-Aqsa remains that battlefield. If genuinely we had to focus on the great human suffering in Gaza, justifiably so, let us now turn the focus fully back onto Masjid al-Aqsa. Why this is so important is because if we look at this through a lens of faith and also through the lens of Al-Aqsa and the Blessed Land, we will not be stuck in the vicissitudes of the news cycle. So if we look, if we're purely driven by whether there's a war or not, whether bombs are falling or not, our attention will be, soon begin to fade or wane when those bombs drop. But if we are motivated by a compass of faith, and we say that this land is perennially important, Al-Aqsa was the second mosque on earth, Al-Aqsa is going to be there as a land important right until Qiyamah. It's a land of ribat and so many things towards the end of Qiyamah. We will then say that our connection should abide beyond the news cycle. So let's put Al-Aqsa back at the center of this narrative to be able to anchor our commitment to this land. So I would say those triple A's for now, Mawlānā, in addition to building power, which is a long-term game, accountability, memorializing, keeping the story alive, then archiving, and Al-Aqsa, always keep Al-Aqsa within our sights.
Yeah, excellent. Mawlānā. One perhaps just an additional from my side is that, locally, I've communicated this recently. I think you were part of that meeting, Mawlānā. We often ask global questions and ignore the local implications thereof. So what can we do? What can we do? On the local front, we have a responsibility because we are the only voices, those living in South African, within the South African borders, who are freedom-loving, justice-loving citizens. That includes Muslims and non-Muslims. That includes Christians and Jews and atheists and people. Faith wasn't the deciding factor here in this genocide. Those who were voicing, were standing on the side of justice just exploded. It was like every different, and it was amazing to see. But we now have an important duty to understand that we are the only people who are going to speak up when things come up in South Africa. When we have leaders, or potential leaders like Helen Zille, who outright denies a genocide. She says, we don't know if it's a genocide. I haven't been there. She does something that the world would look upon as a heinous crime, which is called Holocaust denial. But of course, it's genocide denial. So it's okay when you deny the Holocaust, but it's okay when you deny the genocide because it's against Palestinians, but it's not okay when you deny the Holocaust because that was against people of a different skin color, people of a different ethnicity. That is worrisome. Even internationally, when Barack Obama recognizes that Palestinian people had a tough time and Israeli families had a tough time. That's worrisome. So when things come up on our local front, nobody else besides ourselves are going to be able to say something about that, and we should say something about that as passionately as we would any other cause on the international front. Because there, on the international front, many others may say the same thing and may stand up and speak for justice. But here locally, we have to do our bit, inshallah ta'ala. But in a synopsis, I think you got the gist of it. What I was saying is that we have a duty to speak on our own soil, because the international activists and voices for the struggle are not going to come up and take over the fard kifaya on our behalf and say, you know what, we will take the communal obligation and speak up against this one and that one. The moment something happens in the news, you have 10, 20, 30 different YouTube channels already creating responses to that. 100, 200, 300 TikTok channels internationally already creating responses to that. But when Helen Ziller denies a genocide, that's just, that's okay? Because it's not Holocaust denial? Because the victims are not of a certain ethnicity? Because the victims there were, the colonialists who we should be thankful for, like you tweeted in 2017. That's worrisome. And the fact that she's running for mayor when in the West we have Zahran Mamdani running for mayor in New York, look at the contrast. Where is South Africa headed, and where are where's the Muslims in the West headed? Obviously, it's isolated cases, but still, it's worrisome. So if you can, and the opportunity arises, we have to know that the local front is, what do they call that? Battleground number one, like it's the enemy line, like it's right there. If you're going to be worrying about enemy lines that's far out of your reach, but you overlook the border right in front of you, that's extremely worrisome. Allah Ta'ala knows best. Mawlānā, thank you so much for being with us. Your closing thoughts or comments? So, want to say anything to the viewers, the new viewers of the new channel, inshallah?
Well, I would obviously thank you once again for the opportunity to be able to discuss this very critical issue here today. I think everything that we've covered so far really cuts to which is relating to our preparedness, which is relating to the assessment of the 2 years. In looking at everything that is occurring, to not look at these developments with a short-sighted eye. I always say, do not look at it with one eye that is looking at whatever is occurring in Gaza and ignoring whether it is what is happening on our doorstep, what is happening around the world. Let's look at it in an all-encompassing way and realize that the war has its arena will move to another land until this project is completed and until we see the full result of the resistance manifesting on the ground. The last point that you've made was also extremely critical, and I think I just looked at recently the responses on IOL, the comments, and again, it's difficult to be able to say what are paid trolls versus organic comments. But when Flotilla members returned home, I mean, hundreds of comments, and one prevailing thought that seemed to come from ordinary South Africans, Allah knows best. The reality of the matter is, why are they so invested in something that is happening overseas and not concerned of developments on our own doorstep? And this is basically the gauntlet. This is the gauntlet, the challenge for us currently. If that is a genuine statement, and let's take it as a genuine statement, for the sake of bettering ourselves. Is it that some people feel alienated? The fact that people are more wave a Palestinian flag in the streets and do not seem to be resonating with fellow South Africans and the lived experiences of fellow South Africans. Let us work towards that particular idea, merging our da'wah efforts, our advocacy, our welfare efforts, our upliftment efforts on the ground with infusing a wider global view so that we do not present our struggles as something that is dissonant or something that does not resonate wider South African experience. And one more thing that I should say is I have a strong feeling, man. I have a strong feeling that although this feels as if through the ceasefire, through the Trump plan, those kind of parties have regained the initiative. It's impossible, and all of those people have been won over to the cause. Their unprecedented show of support is not going to dissipate at this particular time. Israel thinks it's through these latest developments has tipped the balance of Western opinion by the ceasefire, by sending some food, by embellishing its image, by deleting some content. It can reverse this trend. They are being myopic. The consequences are going to flow from this for many years to come. And the oppressors, are far. Just look at the history and you'll appreciate this. They are far from realizing just how significant the change of opinion that has occurred over the past few years has been for them. But that's true for all colonial settlers in history. None of them foresee their own end, and we have total conviction and yaqeen that that end is also very soon, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan for the opportunity.
Ameen. Barakallah feekum. Till next time, Mawlānā. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.